What if a continent vanished without a trace, not in the realm of myth, but from the pages of scientific inquiry? While Plato painted a dramatic picture of Atlantis, the tale of Lemuria is far more subtle, emerging from a zoological puzzle in 19th-century London. This is the story of how a small primate in Madagascar sparked a bold theory that shaped our understanding of Earth's ancient, shifting face. In stark contrast to Atlantis, whose grand origins are rooted in Plato's influential ideas from the mid-4th century BCE, Lemuria emerged with a far more modest and obscure beginning in 1864. It debuted in a short essay titled The Mammals of Madagascar, which appeared in the Quarterly Journal of Science, a new periodical published in London. Its creator was the respected English zoologist Philip Lutley Sclater, 1829 to 1913. Just a few years prior, in 1858, Sclater had already published an important framework for understanding the global distribution of animal species. During his work on biogeography, Sclater became fascinated by the unique animal life on the island of Madagascar. This island seemed to lack many of the land animals found on the nearby continent of Africa. He was particularly struck by the lemur, the only primate discovered there. He noted that while 30 different species of lemurs are found in Madagascar alone, all of Africa contains some 11 or 12, while the Indian region has only 3. To explain this pattern, he argued that some land connection must have existed in former ages between Madagascar and India, where on the original stock, whence the present Lemuridae of Africa, Madagascar and India, are descended, flourished. Since Lemuridae are more closely related to American monkeys than to Old World apes, he also suggested a possible land link between Madagascar and the Americas. Based on these ideas, he concluded his essay by proposing the name Lemuria for a vast continent that once stretched across parts of the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, connecting to America in the west and India and its islands in the east. He theorized that this continent later broke up, leaving Madagascar and the Mascarene Islands as its surviving remnants. By the mid-1860s, when The Mammals of Madagascar first appeared, other scientists had already suggested submerged continents in the Indian Ocean to explain the distribution of specific animals, though Sclater didn't explicitly refer to these earlier studies. For instance, in 1859, Alfred R. Wallace, who later became a strong critic of sunken continents, offered a similar explanation for the unusual fauna of the Celebes, stating that such facts can only be explained by a bold acceptance of vast changes in the surface of the Earth. Similarly, the English geologist Searles Furstert Wood also hypothesized a giant southern continent during what we now call the Mesozoic era, based on growing geological and biological evidence. Even earlier, in the 1840s, the French natural historian Étienne Geoffroy Saint-Hilaire speculated that Madagascar was part of a fourth continent in the Indian Ocean. As the German ornithologist Gustav Hartlaub reminded his colleagues in 1877. Therefore, Sclater's true contribution wasn't in proposing a submerged Mesozoic southern continent, but in christening it Lemuria. As Ian Barrow emphasizes, naming signifies ownership and responsibility, allowing the namer to assert control and give voice to a vision. Paul Carter similarly notes that naming delineates a space and gives it character. By giving it a name, Sclater's essay arguably gave the hypothetical land connection between Africa and India a future life and a story, which other unnamed ancient territories missed out on. Naming was thus vital to establishing Lemuria as a concept, turning it into a recognizable and discussable place in the realm of knowledge. Despite giving Lemuria such a distinctive name, Sclater himself didn't pursue the concept much further, mentioning it only briefly in a few other scholarly essays. However, others in the scientific community soon took up the idea. Sclater's submerged place world periodically reappeared in scientific discussions, sometimes in passing, sometimes more prominently, well into the 1960s. It served to illustrate contemporary understandings of Earth's past. a planet characterized by shrinking land masses, submerged land bridges, sunken continents, and vanished terrestrial connections. This accounts for Lemuria's persistent, though often tenuous, presence in Euro-American paleoscientific thought. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it played a role, albeit an unconventional one, in the two dominant intellectual frameworks for studying the Earth at the time: natural history, specifically biogeography, and geology, especially paleogeography. Both fields flourished as global knowledge systems, driven by the increasing flow of geological, paleontological, and biological data from around the world into European scholarly societies, as scientists leveraged the opportunities provided by expanding colonial power. Both sciences were interested in the ancient arrangement of land and water. Biogeography to explain the geographical spread of life forms, past and present, and paleogeography to uncover Earth's hidden history. Both sought connections between parts of the world that are now separate, but might have been linked in the distant past, as the distribution of life forms, revealed by fossils and living species, presented a global geography quite different from modern maps. Through the middle of the 20th century, most paleoscientists held firmly to the fixist idea that Earth's continents and oceans had always occupied their present positions. This idea was eventually abandoned after the 1960s with the acceptance of the mobilist theory of plate tectonics and drifting continents. But until then, scientists on both sides of the Atlantic adhered to one of two beliefs. Either the continents had not fundamentally changed their shapes, the view of the permanentists, or they, or parts of them, periodically sank to the ocean floor only to re-emerge as a result of the Earth's contraction as it cooled from a fiery sphere. The position of the Contractionists. Contractionists, in turn, were divided into two groups: gradualists, mostly from the English-speaking world and influenced by Charles Lyell's theory of uniformitarianism, who saw the submergence and reappearance of land as gradual and continuous, and catastrophists, largely European, who believed Earth's cooling history was marked by periodic cataclysmic events followed by gradual adjustments. Submarine continents and drowned land bridges were therefore common themes in geological and particularly biogeographical thought among contractionists, especially the catastrophists. Throughout the early decades of the 20th century, this included a large portion of the European paleoscientific community, who rejected the permanentist stance first articulated in 1846 by American geologist James Dana. Once a continent, always a continent. Once an ocean, always an ocean. Instead, they believed, with Charles Lyell, that every spot which is now dry land has been sea at some former period, and every part of the space now covered by the deepest ocean has been land. In fact, long before Sclater's work led to Lemuria, other land bridges and continental connections had been proposed in zoogeography, mainly to explain how animals spread across land. As one supporter of such past connections wrote in 1925, "It is impossible in zoogeography to arrive at an acceptable explanation of the distribution of animals if no connections between today's separate continents are assumed to have existed." For instance, in 1846, the English biologist Edward Forbes invoked an ancient Atlantic continent to explain the similar animal life between the Azores, Madeira, and the Canary Islands, and those of North America and Europe. In 1853, Dalton Hooker similarly suggested a land connection between New Zealand, Tasmania, and South America. And in 1866, the Scottish naturalist Andrew Murray eloquently described a Miocene Atlantis linking Europe and America, where the North Atlantic now rolls. So widespread were these ideas that Charles Darwin, who himself had once accepted submerged land connections, complained in 1856 to his friend Charles Lyell that Lyell's followers were recklessly raising and sinking entire continents. Here poor Forbes made a continent to North America and another or the same to the Gulf weed. Hooker makes one from New Zealand to South America, and round the world to Kerguelen land. Here is Wollaston, speaking of Madeira and Porto Santo, as the sure and certain witnesses of a former continent. And all this within the existence of recent species. If you do not stop this, if there be a lower region for the punishment of geologists, I believe, my great master, you will go there. It is within this intellectual climate, preoccupied with mysterious submerged lands and catastrophic drownings, that Lemuria's birth in 1864 must be understood. Peter Tyson recently commented on Sclater's original proposal, suggesting that, in the absence of a better idea, Lemuria took hold in the scientific imagination. Coming 60 years before Alfred Wegener proposed the theory of continental drift, and perhaps a century before the scientific community began to accept it, the idea of a conveniently placed continent that then conveniently vanished without a trace seemed a plausible, if hardly defensible, explanation. However, I would disagree with this quick assessment, which implies that Sclater's vanished place world was merely a crude, though convenient, anomaly in mainstream scientific thought. Although it has a unique name, Lemuria belongs to a family of other similar entities that various paleosciences had brought into existence, so it isn't unique from that perspective. What makes its story unusual is what happened to it outside the realm of mainstream science, where it quietly disappeared once the fixist, contractionist, and catastrophic theories that supported its existence fell out of favor. With their demise, as we will see, Lemuria also faded from the labors of loss of the paleoscientist. In the end, Lemuria's journey from a zoologist's hypothesis to a faded memory in mainstream science illustrates the ever-changing landscape of human understanding. It was a continent named into existence, a testament to the scientific imagination grappling with deep time. But as the Earth itself revealed its true, mobile nature through plate tectonics, the static, contracting world that gave birth to Lemuria collapsed, taking this intriguing lost world with it, a powerful echo from a time when the planet's past was still a vast, uncharted mystery.